Okay. So I'd like to welcome everyone to our second video conference call for the MBM 5523 class on mindfulness and compassion-based leadership in healthcare. And today we've invited a broader Saybrook University community to join us for a special presentation on the topic of servant leadership and followership, compassion, and mindfulness in healthcare. And so I'd like to just start with a short mindfulness practice. Let's just do a little bit of centering. So I invite everyone to take a few deep breaths in and just become aware of your breathing. And as you become aware of your breathing, becoming fully present to wherever you're sitting, the room that you're in, and the connection that we have with each other. And just feeling a sense of energy in our heart spaces, reaching out to each other, being open and receptive to this, what we will be hearing today. And so I welcome everyone back, fully present. And I would like to, first of all, welcome Luann Fortune, Dr. Fortune, who is my faculty mentor, and would like to say a few words before we begin. You're muted, Luann.
There we go. It's a different panel. Thank you, Dorianne, and thank you, Dr. Davis, for being with us. And thank you to everybody for joining us today. I'm very excited to be here. I'm the coordinator for the Mindful Leadership Specialization in the Department of Mind-Body Medicine in the College of Integrative Medicine and Health Sciences at Saybrook University. And I am particularly excited about this because I've been working on this curriculum for about a year now. Dorianne has joined us to help work on that because of her very particular scholar practitioner background in this, and this course, along with all of the courses we're developing in the Mindful Leadership Specialization, are evidence-based. So it was over a year ago, Dr. Moss, hey, actually credit him with this idea because he said, I think there's something going on out there in leadership, in organizational systems, and I think there's a place for us with our focus on mind-body medicine and our ability to walk the walk. And when I was in Washington at the Mindful Leadership Summit last November, sitting with 1,000 people who were doing consulting, coaching, and themselves were organizational leaders. And we're all practicing different mindfulness practices and talking about how we could change and transform our organizations. I knew we were on to something. So I am just delighted to be with you today. And I would like to introduce Dr. Moss. So do you want to say a few words?
I will say just a few words. Thank you, Luann, and welcome to our audience today. I have been interested since I first saw the words mindfulness paired with leadership in what we could do in this direction. Saybrook is dedicated to body, mind, and spirit in its approaches to psychology, to healthcare, to mind-body practices. And when we look at the field of leadership, we've been looking at it holistically for several years, but now we're tapping into a couple of different streams here. Mindfulness as a movement came to us out of Buddhist traditions, especially with Jon Kabat-Zinn. But there are also some other threads in the field right now called reflective leadership, which comes out of a faith-based approach, and also servant leadership, which also I'm familiar with this concept for many years because a faith-based community near me at Hope College in Western Michigan has been promoting the concept of a servant leader. So today I'm really looking forward to Dr. Davis and her particular perspective, bringing together servant leadership, followership, along with the compassion and mindfulness base that we've been cultivating for for several years now through our mindfulness courses. So anyway, I'm very much looking forward to this presentation.
Wonderful, thank you. And so if everyone can mute themselves, other than Dr. Davis, I would like to introduce Dr. Davis. I'm just really, really excited and happy to have Dr. Crystal Davis with us today. She's a longtime colleague and friend. She's the author of 3 books, Leading from Within, The Spirituality of Servant Leadership, Leadership and Followership, Examining the Impact of Workplace Behavior, and Bloom Where You Are Planted, Reflections on Servant Leadership, that's in pending publication. Her research interests are in the areas of servant leadership, organizational development and culture, change management, and diversity in management. Dr. Davis holds a BA in journalism and mass communications from Kansas State University, an MHR in human relations from the University of Oklahoma, and a doctorate in management, specializing in organizational leadership from the University of Phoenix. She has a consulting practice, a firm that helps organizations and leaders to improve business results by empowering authentic conversations and encouraging members at all levels of the organization to build trust, awareness, and meaningful contribution. So I'm very pleased to turn this over to you, Dr. Davis. Thank you very much for joining us, and you can take it away.
Well, good morning, Dr. Dorianne, and thank you for that great introduction that made me think, yes, I am a Midwest girl, aren't I? K-State and University of Oklahoma are in the Midwest, and I just bring you wonderful, crisp morning, good mornings from the state of Kansas. For anyone who's interested, I'm about 20 miles from my alma mater, Kansas State University, go Wildcats. And so I am just so honored and privileged to have the opportunity to talk to colleagues. And I also want to recognize Dr. Moss, who I just met this morning, and Dr. Luann. Thank you so much for having me, and my longtime friend and colleague, Dr. Dorianne. And so I'm very interested and excited to just have a conversation with you this morning about servant leadership, followership, and the interest really of Saybrook University, which I've had the lovely opportunity over the last weeks to browse the website and find out more just about what Saybrook is about, what the mission is. And wow, this is fabulous for this day and time. And I think it's apropos for many universities to kind of follow suit in a lot of what Saybrook is talking about, what they're teaching students, and how that can then manifest in the world community. So this morning, we will talk about servant leadership, and this is a part of Dr. Dorian's class in mindfulness and compassion-based leadership in healthcare. So we'll see if this now is going to go. Let's see here. Okay, so our agenda for this morning is that we will just look at what servant leadership is, what the servant leadership theory is, and who servant leaders are. I'd like to share with you an impact story about a company that I worked with last year, Fresenius Kidney Care in North America. I've conducted some research and a literature review about the alignment and kind of the interrelatedness of servant leadership and followership, mindfulness, compassionate leadership, and how all of these ideas really impact healthcare professionals. I also want to say that the articles are articles that are US based, but also I looked at research internationally, some great research coming out of the UK and also out of Germany. So I just wanted to be able to give us kind of a global perspective on these ideas, and then just encourage us from a heart space as participants, as students at Saybrook and colleagues, to understand and to know that servant leaders show up every day in every way. So what is the theory of servant leadership? Well, I have spent the last 7 years from an academic perspective researching and studying the philosophy of servant leadership. And it has become my life's passion and my life's calling. And as I started to reflect on that, what I realized is that I've always been what we call an emerging servant leader. I remember as far back as when I was a little girl in the church and always listening to my mom, who taught me and my twin sister and brothers about servant leadership, service, community service. So I realized really about 7 years ago, as I approached my doctoral studies, that wow, this is something that has been a lifelong passion. And here is an academic concept, a theory actually. Yay! Who knew? Before I started just studying leadership and servant leadership specifically. So it's a calling, it's a passion that I work with in my consulting firm, and it is a fantastic life to live, really to talk about, to teach, and to role model servant leadership for my 14-year-old son. So what is servant leadership about? Well, it is basically a philosophy and a set of practices which enriches our lives. It builds better organizations. There's so much research out there, and I've had the privilege of talking and being in many organizations and reading about many more that use the servant leadership approach. And it has created just meaningful organizations and great super bottom line results. It creates this just atmosphere of a caring workplace. And the bottom line, and the best to me, is that people show up to work loving what they do and loving who they work with. So we know that this is a timeless concept. However, the phrase was coined by our friend Robert K. Greenleaf in his seminal work, The Servant as Leader. And he first published that article in 1970. And by the way, I'm also just excited to be at first a student with the Greenleaf Center for Servant Leadership, an organization that touts Robert Greenleaf's work and holds annual conferences and engages students and corporations and organizations and teams across the country in this concept. And I was really excited to, in October, attend our 25th annual conference on servant leadership in Dallas. And it was just a wonderful opportunity to meet all of the thought leaders in servant leadership, and to understand them. And I was very excited to meet, and some of you may know Dr. Larry Spears, who is the foremost author and thought leader in servant leadership. And he also wrote an endorsement for my book. So there you go. I was really excited about that. So our friend Robert Greenleaf, who, by the way, is also a Quaker, this was his definition of servant leadership. It is the servant leader who is servant first. And this is the key separation between leaders and servant leader. It begins with this natural feeling. I like to say this, like inner feeling that one wants to serve. And that is the feeling first. And then conscious choice brings a person to aspire to lead. And you can see the difference in people who are leaders and people who leaders first, and those who have the consciousness, mindset, and heart space to serve others. And so this is the definition and concept from which all of the work from the Greenleaf Center is based on, and a lot of the research in the marketplace today. And so Robert Greenleaf challenged us with a best test, and this is what he called it. This is the best test, and how we can tell that people show up as serving leaders and that servant leadership works. And you see it all over in all of the research. Most every person who writes a dissertation has the best test there. And so this is what it is. It's the best test and the most difficult to administer. And these are the questions. Do those served grow as persons? And do they, while being served, become healthier, wiser, freer, more autonomous, and more likely to become servants? And what is the effect on the least privileged in society? Will they benefit or at least not be further deprived. And this is a concept by which standards are judged in servant leadership, and even a lot of the corporations, nonprofits, whether they're faith-based or community-based organizations, lean into when they are judging and using benchmarks for their servant leadership approach. The best test is the basis of much of the work of the Greenleaf Center and a lot of the organizations in today's marketplace. So in doing my research, here lately, I've just been so excited. Dr. Dorian knows that I'm a researcher at heart. And if any of you out there have ever done your Myers-Briggs personality type, and I think I see invisible hands raising or invisible heads shaking, like, yes, I know what mine is. There was an article written by my friend, Dr. Spears, Dr. Lewis, and Dr. Lafferty, and they combined and talked about your natural gifts as a serving leader, as a servant leadership, and how that aligns to the Myers-Briggs personality type. And it was a fascinating read. You can find it online, and I just wanted to highlight some of the points that came out of that pamphlet. Is that, again, and this is servant leaders are found in every person in all walks of life. I know that when I travel around and teach and facilitate workshops, a lot of people say, well, Crystal, I'm not a leader, or I'm just an employee, or, I'm just a person who works here in the organization. But what we're finding and what I'm excited to talk about is that based on your natural gifts, every person serves and every person is a servant leader. And in finding out what your natural gifts are and how you can use those to serve really impacts and encourages people to be servant leaders. Right, so we all have different gifts. We offer them to our families every day. We offer them to teams, to organizations, and indeed the world. And by understanding these gifts, we can make our greatest contribution to servant leadership, and then appreciate the differences that we all have. And so, for example, when I was looking at that, and I'm an analytical thinker, any analytical thinkers out there? Okay, maybe I see an invisible hand or two. Dr. Larry and the author suggest to us that to make the most of our natural tendencies. And therefore, for example, I used analytical thinking because that's one of my gifts, is that you should use that rather than attempting to write poetry. And yes, that is so true for me. I cannot write poetry, but I'm an analytical thinker. And that when you use your natural gifts, this is how you will best show up to serve others. And that's others, again, in your organization, in your teams, and in your family. And I always like to include family when we talk about the workplace and organizations, because as we know, we all spend a lot of hours in the workplace and in our organizations. But servant leadership also shows up, and when it shows up at home and with our marriage partners and with our children, is when it's best then can transfer into the workplace and people that we work with every day and spend a lot of time with. So when we look at who is a servant leader, servant leaders are people who rely on deep listening more than telling people, persuading, more than commanding, empowering people more than controlling. And they do set the bar high and focus on helping others succeed rather than this kind of self-interest. And our friend, Dr. Maya Angelou, may she rest in peace, I think she said it beautifully. I've learned that people always forget what you say or what you did, but as servant leaders, they always remember how you made them feel. And when we look at servant leaders who have deep listening, persuasion, empowering, and setting the bar high, that allows your employees to leave from a conversation with you or an interaction or a task feeling like they've been heard, they've been empowered, and they've been coached to show up as the best person that they can be. So I want to just dive into kind of a shameless plug, Dr. Dorian, and thank you. I have had the great opportunity to work with Palgrave McMillan on a series in leadership and followership. And your professor, Dr. Dorian Ann, and I had the opportunity to write two of the, I think now 7 books in this series with Palgrave Macmillan on servant leadership, and Dr. Dorian wrote on authentic leadership. And we had the great opportunity to enlist our colleagues from across the world to help us engage on these ideas about authentic leadership, and for me, servant leadership and followership. And so I wrote, with the help of 12 colleagues, we delved into how servant leadership and followership impacts behavior in the workplace. And so, in essence, our book was providing just this understanding of how employees and followers understand and behave as serving leaders in the workplace. And our book looked at, empirical chapters as well as conceptual research. Again, we had colleagues from all over the world. I was fortunate to have Dr. Peter Mawau from Nigeria to write about Madonna University and how servant leaders there created this university in really one of the most underserved areas in Nigeria, and how they were, as a team, able to bring this university to fruition. I had Dr. Julie Konzelman, who talked about servant leadership in the retail industry, which was fascinating work that she did on understanding how servant leadership in the workplace empowers people who serve customers in the retail industry. And then my friend, Dr. Edward Breslin, wrote about servant leadership as a volunteer for the Volunteers Guild in a hospital in Destin, Florida. So just a variety of articles that brought together how servant leadership shows up in the workplace. And then also we had articles on social role stereotypes, females in servant leadership, and diversity in the workplace. So all of that combined just to offer insight for ways to organizations to continue to adapt to and progress in line with today's shifting moral demands. So a great book, and it's out on Amazon. So what was the core meaning and the core essence of our book? Well, the premise really that we wrote from, and kind of the heart space, was that the servant leader and follower are one. They're definitely interrelated and intertwined. And that leadership and followership of a servant-led nature impact so many things. Number one being, because we're talking about mindfulness and compassion this morning, is the inner life of the person, which then leads to the effectiveness of their work, the collective health of people. And we see that, in their behavior. And we understand that if people, employees, teams, managers, and leaders understand servant leadership, understand the antecedents to servant leadership, and that it's a leadership philosophy that really begins from within, that if we're able to practice that more authentically, the manifestation, right, the results of that is greater freedom. We see that wisdom, health, autonomy, selfless behavior in others, and for corporations, increased bottom line. I'm consistently, when you're in the marketplace, specifically with corporations, having to suggest and talk about how, which some corporations see as soft skills, definitely, and also additionally impact bottom line. But we also know that if people are able to work from a heart space and a head space, that organizations will get the best, and people will show up knowing that they get true meaning for work. So I love what David White says. I've just recently been reading his book, In Crossing the Unknown Sea, Work as a Pilgrimage of Identity. And this is a heart space quote. I just love it. And he says, every organization who's attempting to wake up to this newly youthful world is now asking for qualities from people that are touchstones of their humanity. Is that amazing in the workplace today? He says, I'm certain of nothing but the holiness of the heart's affections. And he quotes that from Keats. And so he says the heart's affection are indeed holy. And if organizations today are asking for people's hearts and minds, they are simply asking, in a way, for their holy and hidden affection at the same time. And I thought that was just beautiful. You know, White goes further to say that it is difficult to be creative and enthusiastic about anything for which we do not feel affection. And so if the aims of companies or organizations today are entirely fiscal, then they will engage those whose affections are towards the almighty dollar. However, if they have a range of qualities or a sense of creative engagement to be found coming through their doors, they may get in return something more worthwhile from their people. So I thought that was a beautiful just understanding about how the workplace and how organizations and teams are shifting, and we are inviting them to shift, so that we are bringing in really harnessing people's heart and meaningful contribution in the workplace. So in my work last year, I want to talk to you about an impact story with Fresenius Kidney Care in North America. And I believe they have the mindset that David White talked about in the earlier slide, in moving their organization from one of top-down hierarchy into kind of organically flat organizations that continue to make their patients their number one priority, and to also work together as employees to create better meaning in the workplace. So I'm not sure if you all know about Fresenius Kidney Care, but it is a dialysis company that originated in Germany. And their then Bill Valley CEO, who has since our engagement with them been promoted to the North America division of Fresenius Medical Care. But we worked with Bill Valley over several years, beginning in 2015, to create what we called a servant leadership program that was called Leading with Values. And so just to give you some insight into Fresenius, you know, they have 975,000 patients on dialysis, the number one dialysis company now next to DaVita here in the United States, employs 70,000 people, and they have 4,000 clinical managers who lead the clinics around the country. And so in 2015, the MVPs, the RVPs, and the CEO and the C-suite leadership team went through the Leading with Values program first. And beginning in 2015, then they hired 20 of us subject matter experts in servant leadership. And so we began with the Leading with Values program at the clinical cascade portion of the program. And it was very exciting to just harness their mission, which was to deliver superior care that improves the quality of life for every patient every day, setting the standards by which others in the healthcare industry are judged. And at that time, I was really honored and a road warrior, I might say. From February 1, 2017 to December, I had the just honor and privilege to travel to 46 cities, basically coast to coast. I'm working with Fresenius and facilitating the Leading with Values program. Now, for those of you who are looking at this and also can read between the lines, as we know, I don't believe anything is coincidence, and I know that everything really kind of works together in divine order. And at that time, I was the primary caretaker for my mother for 16 of the 20 years that she was a patient of Fresenius here in Kansas. And so she passed and made her transition on February 1st of 2017. The same morning I signed the contract with Fresenius. And so I then was able to spend all of last year traveling. And it was a wonderful opportunity to share my experiences as a patient advocate for my mother for 16 years. And then to be able to then come and have this 360 and join Fresenius and teach and use my dissertation, use my doctoral studies, and my experience in servant leadership to help facilitate this program. Coincidence, you say? Nope, not at all. That worked out just perfectly for me, and I had a wonderful time facilitating this program. And so in my travels across the country, I met so many wonderful people, wonderful serving leaders who work with teams, patient care technicians, nurses, and nephrology doctors who treat dialysis patients. So if anyone knows about dialysis, it's basically a terminal diagnosis when you learn that you now have to take dialysis for the rest of your life. And so a lot of patients are not happy campers when they first understand that they'll have to take dialysis for 4 hours a day, 3 times a week for the rest of their life. And so Bill Valley and the executive team wanted to bring a program into Fresenius that says, hey, how can we be more deeply attuned? And in this case, this morning, we're talking about mindfulness. How can we be more mindful and compassionate to the 975,000 people that we serve every day? And how does that look? And how can we show up in a greater way for the people we served? And so we worked together to create this program. And what happened is a lot of the people came with a head for results and a heart for service. So that became our mantra. That became my mantra as I traveled around the country, talking about what Fresenius does for patients, and then how we took the Leading with Values program to heart, so that we still are people who work for a head for results and a heart for service. So I met so many clinical managers. And now, granted, I want to say that we have a lot of the seasoned nurses and clinicians, and these were clinical managers and nurses who had 35 years, 40 years with Fresenius. And they met our leadership program with resistance. Some saying to me, Crystal, you know, I've been through so many leadership programs over the years with Fresenius. How is this one different? But, you know, as I traveled through the country, and as I met with the clinicians over and over again, we actually had a 5-month curriculum. So we had 5 sessions. So I was fortunate enough to see many of the cohorts that I worked with over a 5-month period. So 5 times, once a month, to get to see them. And you know what I realized and what was happening is by the last session, and usually and generally by session 3, I witnessed aha moments, light bulb moments, with people who were just gaining an inner awareness of the tools and of the frameworks that we were using and that we were facilitating and teaching. And many of them, so many of them, just as I did and I continue to do in my personal life, spoke to how the frameworks worked at home with their husbands, with their wives, with their teenagers. And yay, I'm raising my hand. I have a 14-year-old teenager, and how impactful the frameworks were at home, and then how they could bring those into the workplace. And at each session, I heard about those changes. You know, I wrote them in my reports that were required, and we could see and feel that people, the clinical managers, and even their leaders in C-suite were using the frameworks, becoming more aware, operating from a heart space, and still doing all the things that they had to do. And again, in the dialysis world, clinics are off the chain, for lack of a better word. A lot of the nurses and patient care technicians work anywhere from 12 to 14 hours a day. Many of them have 12 to 36 chairs in a clinic, which they turn over about 3 times a day. So if you can imagine, it's a very high intensity moving and shaking place, always being very cognizant of the patients in the chairs and everything else that's happening all around them. So I really became to understand very quickly what the dialysis culture and what clinics look like. from a leadership perspective. And again, as I said, I was very fortunate to see it from a patient perspective because I'd be at clinic with my mom here in Kansas, and it was very early morning. At 6 a.m., my mom was the first one in the chair. So I got to see it also from that perspective. So just a beautiful opportunity for me to see that from both perspectives and to have some great insight and awareness about how servant leadership and the Leading with Values program could benefit the staff and employees for greater patient and quality of life for the patient care. So you asked what was our curriculum? Why, thank you. I'm glad that you asked. Our curriculum with the Leading with Values program included these 9 frameworks and tools. And so I won't go over all of these. I just wanted to kind of give you an idea of the things that we talked about. And I really want to focus on one of the frameworks, the power with serving leader versus the power over the heroic leadership. And so one of the things that we were teaching in the framework is to move from these things as, a reactive orientation to a proactive orientation, to help move clinical managers from this kind of deficit-based thinking to asset-based thinking, moving them from problem focus to an outcome focus, and creating these thinking environments where, again, clinicians and their teams were mindful of one another, self-aware of one another, providing this opportunity and space for people to be heard, for people to, talk about things they weren't happy about, to have this space where ideas and everyone would have a voice and ideas could come out. Whether they were used or implemented on or not, that it was just a space they were creating that allowed everybody's voice to be heard. And oh boy, this one was a lot of fun. And even as subject matter experts in servant leadership, I had such a beautiful opportunity to shift my perspective, on this concept we talked about, becoming a thinking partner versus an expert teller. And this was a great framework that they really took hold to because, in the healthcare industry, that's what nurses are trained to do. They're trained to be experts. They're trained to diagnose the problem. They are trained to react to the problem that's happening. And so we were not facilitating or teaching that should not continue to happen. But in addition to that, to invite this kind of thinking partnership energy in along with that, where ideas are allowed to flow, people are allowed to work together as a cohesive team, and decisions are, allowed and invited to be made from a collective shared experience. And of course, the moving from drama to empowerment, we had a lot of fun with that one because people are always pretty interested and excited, right, in talking about the drama or quote, the drama king or the drama queen at the workplace. And everyone knows who they are, right? So that was great. And we used the work from TED, the empowerment dynamic, which is some great work that helped us to look at this. So I remember Dr. Luann was saying that the program here with Saybrook is evidence-based, and I'm here with the Leading with Values project to also years of evidence-based research on these frameworks to help that. And just as a side note for the students here, and you're welcome, it's just a side smile. These competencies are important to prioritize for leadership development in a clinical healthcare setting. So if you see that, then I've read your syllabus, so you're welcome. As we move forward, talking about just the one framework, this relationship shift, right? When we're talking about mindfulness and compassion, where we are inviting ourselves to shift from this power over, which we call heroic leadership, to this power with, which we call serving leadership. And as you can see here on the screen, Third River Partners have just created an amazing program with this, with Fresenius in mind, that is inviting the clinical managers, the C-suite managers, even across the organization to the patient care technicians, which in my personal opinion are the most important people because they have the direct working relationship with the client every day, each day, getting them in the chair, getting them hooked up to the machines, talking to them, monitoring the 4 hours they're in the chair. And so at the end of our contract, Fresenius was in further discussions to move to taking the Leading with Values programs to the patient care technicians, which I think was just a fabulous idea because they're directly involved with the patients every day. So we were inviting leaders, right, to move from leaders that determine the direction and exerts the unilateral influence to where leadership is shared, to move in on the focus from, specifically people at the top to where the focus is on mutual learning, shared understanding and coordinated action between everyone. And to move from this heroic leader, right, this picture of the Atlas with the guy with the world on his shoulders, where they, feel like they have to do everything and act independently, where we were inviting through the Leading with Values program that the leader builds interdependent relationships, right, where you value the voice and expertise of the team, and allow room for the team who work with the patients every day to say, wow, this works better. And I've noticed, that this works better with this patient, right? And this works better with a patient who maybe is resistant or comes in angry or who comes in depressed. And so allowing that kind of information to be heard, to develop plans, action plans for the greater of the clinic and for the patients involved. And then, from this moving from this heroic leadership position where the leader's job is to create the vision, inspire the people, and hold people accountable, where then the leader's job is to build strong, not string, I saw that typo there, teams with a common vision, mutual influence and accountability with not only to the leader, but to one another. And so this is where I really believe that healthcare settings, particularly in the clinical setting, in which leaders consider mindfulness and compassion, that we can see this shift, right, occur from being this heroic leader where you feel like everything's on your shoulders, you have to do everything alone, to a serving leader where you engage your team. And so as can be seen here, of course, I had the great opportunity to meet, and we had the key words in the program, such as serving leaders. And that is what you see here are clinical managers from across the United States who were eager, really, in transforming their leadership style, again, into one that moved from power over as heroic leaders to power with others as serving leaders. And I had a beautiful time meeting, engaging, interacting with a lot of the people. And just to be quite authentic and transparent, there were some people who didn't like the Leading with Values program. They didn't get it. They said, oh, this is mushy, soft stuff. Why is Fresenius doing this? And what we found over the course of time is that several of them, the key word here is deselected themselves. And so they decided that the company was not for them anymore. And they found something else to do. And we see this all across the literature, right? The book, The Serving Leader, 5 Actions That Will Change Your Organization, where if people in the organization are not in alignment with servant leadership or programs, that allow this kind of shift in the organizational culture, they will simply deselect themselves and decide that somewhere else might be better for them. And so that is the reality also of servant leadership, is that it is strong enough to understand that if people, and Fresenius in Bill Valley said, the bus is loading and we are going this way, and we have a seat for you on the bus. However, if you are not going the direction we want to go, and then we're happy to help you find somewhere else or someplace else where you can find greater meaning for work. The picture to the left is a group that I was with in New Jersey. And a quick story about New Jersey. The clinic there is in, for lack of a better word, in the hood. And a lot of our consultants, that was not the first place they chose to go and facilitate the Leading with Values program. So I got asked to do this cohort in New Jersey over the 5-course period. And it was wonderful. And it was quite different, as you might imagine, from, when I was in Portland and when I was in Phoenix, where we'd conduct and facilitate the teachings in the regional buildings, which are beautiful. They pulled out the red carpet and beautiful lunches. As opposed to when I went to the clinic in Newark, New Jersey, where there were bars on the windows. There were bars on the doors. There was security at the front door who had to escort me in and out of the building. And I had the most glorious time at that clinic because I came to understand very quickly that the patients in Newark were really the underserved dialysis patients in New Jersey. And this clinic really worked with underprivileged and underserved patients of all ages. I met a gentleman who was 27 there. I met a lady who was 86 at the clinic. And I got to really listen deeply. It's interesting because I posted on my Facebook page, facilitating, hashtag facilitating in the conference room, hashtag deep listening in the dialysis chair. And so I will always really remember the entire experience, but specifically with Newark, because I listened to the voice of the people and the dialysis patients there. And I also understand that they felt and they believe that their clinical managers, after our time together, were more mindful of them and listening to them. Miss Mary that I met at 86 years old, I came in and she said, "Who are you? Are you one of the leaders from Fresenius, from high up?" And I said, "Oh, no, ma'am. I'm here to teach the Leading with Values program." And she said, "What's that?" And I said, it's a leadership program where we're just going to talk about how we can get along, how we can work with one another better, and how we can provide more quality services to you. And she says in her voice, "Well, they need that. These people need this around here." So I was always excited to see Miss Mary as I would go month to month to New Jersey to the clinic there. And my last session, there she was waiting for me, got there a little bit after 8 o'clock. And she says, "Miss Crystal, I'm waiting on you. I was waiting on you." She said, "They tell me this is your last time." And I said, "Yes, ma'am, Miss Mary, we are complete with the program." And she says, "Well, I think you people have done a great job because I can tell in the clinic floor it's much better, and we sure hate you have to leave." So my heart space for her, and I always think about her and always sending her positive energy and positive just reinforcement, because I remember our time and what that really showed me about being mindful, right, and being compassionate is that in addition to teaching and facilitating, that you also have to just meet people where they are and show that kind of compassion and love, if you will, to patients who may not understand all of the leadership jargon and all of this kind of academic stuff, but they can feel and they know when they're loved, they know when they're cared for, and they know when they're paid attention to. And I feel that a part of that experience was being a caretaker for my mother all those years, and understanding really in the trenches what it takes to be a caretaker and to care for elderly who are sick and who had a variety of illnesses. And so I enjoyed New Jersey. And so one time I was able to go to New York. My girlfriend lives there. And here for fun, I finally realized that Spider-Man is real. So funny. I finished my facilitation in Newark, and I wanted to visit my girlfriend and family in New York. So I took the train into Penn Station, which was my first time doing. So I felt very proud that I figured that out. And I had to take this picture for my 14-year-old son to let him know that I had met Spider-Man. So as you might imagine, I've gotten a lot of brownie points for this picture. And it was great kind of just being in Times Square in New York City. Oh, and so I digress. Okay, so now to spend a few minutes on the current research that I was able to do in the last couple of weeks with servant leadership and mindfulness. I was very interested in this meme by Dr. Shanita, who talks about the effects on just our cognitive function. And I would like to say just on our life, our awareness, our energy, our brain functions when we practice mindfulness. And I know that the listeners here today, I mean, you're here at Saybrook, you're in this class, so you're probably quite aware of the different effects of mindfulness, you know, in terms of helping you to problem solve, you know, to cultivate a better attitude, you know, as related to stress. I thought this was a great one, to increase openness and extroversion, right? That's wonderful. And I just kind of saw extroversion as, you know, opening up to your team, opening up to your staff, opening up to your family members. And I thought that was interesting for people who specifically, you know, identify as introverts, you know, and reducing negative emotions, you know, and the need to worry also promotes kind of that emotional stability. You know, that made me think about emotional intelligence in the workplace now. I follow a guy, Dr. Travis, on LinkedIn, and his research is in emotional intelligence, and he does a lot of work around that and publishes his posts on LinkedIn about that. Now, that's also a topic we talk about pretty extensively in the servant leadership literature, because it's also an alignment to being aware and being self-aware of your emotions, your feelings, so that you're also better prepared to be emotionally well for others. So I thought this meme was pretty good to just kind of talk about some of the effects of cognitive function. So when we talk about servant leadership, I just wanted to briefly mention, so our servant leadership guru, Robert Greenleaf, included awareness, which to me, I directly aligned to mindfulness as a critical element, you know, of successful servant leaders. And Dr. Larry Spears, as I had mentioned earlier, from this developed 10 core competencies. And they are also, you know, written about extensively in the servant leadership literature and in the servant leadership movement. And so these are the 10, and, you know, some of you might be aware of these because they are really talked about in the workplace, and these competencies for leaders in clinical healthcare settings, but then, you know, in other settings as well. And I highlighted self-awareness because I know it feels very good when we talk about mindfulness and helping people understand that if leaders are able to lead from this holistic perspective, right, of consciousness, where they're able to integrate the big picture and also remaining inner mindful, internally mindful, inner aware of themselves and others. It's really one of the core competencies that we talk about and facilitate quite a bit in the servant leadership information. And also, Robert Greenleaf said even implicit in the nature of implicit in the nature of a servant leader is a deep well of awareness of one's own talents and capacity for full and free self-expression. And as Greenleaf put it, servant leaders are people who, by the quality of their inner life, manifest in their presence. They're able to lift others up and make the entire servant leadership journey possible. So Greenleaf, as I said, as a Quaker, really divulged and talked quite a bit about the inner life of a person and how that inner life manifests into behaviors in the workplace, behavior in the community, and how people show up at work and have this kind of mindful presence about themselves, which employees and followers always attract to, and want to be empowered to also have that same kind of self-awareness. And so I love this quote from Greenleaf. Actually, I have it on my computer. And it is just speaks directly to those who are emerging servant leaders, or who, say they are servant leaders and continue to show up like that every day. And he says, awareness is not a giver of solace. It is just the opposite. It is a disturber and an awakener. And so able leaders are usually sharply awake and reasonably disturbed. I love that. They are not seekers after solace. They have their own inner serenity. And I thought that was beautiful. I read that actually from time to time because it really helps me. Greenleaf goes on to say the purpose of awareness from his perspective is to fulfill the needs of others and to persuade those being led toward the common good. The journey begins with self-awareness, and it can only be charted when we successfully answer questions like, who am I? Why am I here? Where am I going? And how will I get there? So as we become more aware of self, we are in the position to be more aware of the needs of others. And we can help them, all of them, within our circles of influence. I like to say within my tribe, so that they're also more aware. And he also says this point, and I really like this: awareness of others is not a one-dimensional sense. So when we become aware of a problem or issue, as servant leaders, we just don't sit on it. We actively engage those we work with and those we lead, and we apply the scope of servant leadership characteristics as a means of holistic resolution. And let me say, this is not an easy feat for the busy leader. I'm sure you all, as mindful or practitioners of mindfulness, understand the research they have out there now about the busy leader. And then again, those of us who are too busy for he or she that we lead, well, it's just that, a busy leader, not a servant leader. So now I will be the first to admit, you see my hand raised, that, busyness is a destroyer of mindfulness, right? We know that. And so every day, kind of this work-life balance is something that I invite myself, I invite others to be mindful and aware of every day. I see this thing on Facebook. It talked about stop the glorification of busyness. And I was like, yes, yes, yes. And granted, I mean, we all are busy in our lives. I'm a single mom. I have a son who's in track, and, we have church activities. We have webinars that we facilitate. We have lives that are full and that are beautiful. And we have a lot to do. And that all can still happen every day if we just consider each day, our mindfulness, our breathing exercise, and ways to always come back to the present moment. So since servant leaders are servants first, right, as opposed to leaders first, the true servant leader refuses to ignore what is broken. He or she will simply not hope for a situation to resolve itself, but will proactively point out specific observable behaviors or outcomes that fall short of the desired performance. The attitude is not, I told you so. Rather, it is one of, and I love this, it's in the language. As you saw in the Leading with Values, we talked about empowering language versus disempowering language. So to say to your employee, because I want you to succeed, or because you are important to this organization, contributes to self-awareness versus self-doubt. And even, we have employees who are cynics. So as we move forward to the other research, I really looked at about 10 main articles. And in the essence of time here, I think I have, about 20 minutes. We'll discuss 4 of them. But I do want to let you know that I emailed your professor, Dr. Dorian, the research. So if anyone here wants to take a deeper dive, certainly you can contact me. Dr. Dorian also has the articles available. And so when we look at the research, research article number 1, we looked at leadership and followership. Just looking at more research as I remember the shameless plug for my book on servant leadership and followership. And here are just some of the main takeaways from this article. And also I wanted to say that in looking at these articles, I did look at research in mindfulness and followership and compassion from US-based authors, but we also have articles here from UK and also from Germany. So just I wanted to provide kind of also the global perspective on mindfulness, compassion, and servant leadership. So in this article, Can Servant Leadership Fuel the Leadership Fire? You know, just some of the main takeaways is that servant leaders instill in followers a positive and attractive conception of being a leader, and that, yeah, it's a responsibility that's well worth having. Also, it's suitable to foster self-esteem in followers, to become serving leaders themselves. Remember the best test from Robert Greenleaf. Part of a servant leadership journey, right, is to help others, encourage and invite others to become serving leaders themselves. And that servant leadership, you know, really represents strong role models in conveying to followers that leading, you know, leadership is an attractive and desirable responsibility. In research article 2, this is our friend Dr. Verdorfer out of Germany, who has done extensive servant leadership. I actually have a couple other articles of his unrelated to mindfulness and compassion. And I also had an email conversation with him. So that was a beautiful opportunity to network. And he's done some beautiful research in servant leadership in Germany in the healthcare setting. And so in this article, the main takeaways here is, of course, as we know, mindful-based interventions are efficient, and they are an efficient route to psychological functioning in the clinical, you know, as well as the non-clinical setting. And mindfulness is uniquely suited to predicting humility in people. That was interesting. And it fosters concrete servant leadership behaviors as exhibited in the leaders. And this is a great article. I think if anyone's interested, you should definitely get this one from Dr. Dorian. Further on this research article, you know, he talks about, as we know, the work of Shapiro and other authors who talk about this idea, this philosophy of re-perceiving. And they argue that mindfulness, right, facilitates this shift. So it's kind of a shift in perspective where you move from, and you're able to, which is also rooted in Buddhist philosophy, that you detach from your thoughts and emotions, you know, about a situation or about the present moment, and focus on the genuine awareness of the experience rather than the content. And I believe this aligns beautifully with servant leadership, because it really becomes this shift from kind of this self-centered subjective experience, right, to this objective perspective, which also lends to greater humility. And in the research article number 3, Mindfulness and Self-Compassion Among Healthcare Professionals, a review of the literature, Kelly Rabb does an excellent job, I think, and I think if you were to ask me, this is another article that is beautiful and that ties in, that you might want to get from Dr. Dorian. Some of the main takeaways here is that learning to be sensitive, right, non-judgmental and respectful towards oneself helps to facilitate that same ability for others. And we know that self-compassion, mindfulness, kind of our inner awareness of self first, will always benefit others, everybody that we come into contact with, that we work with, that we lead. And so this is really important. And that mindfulness and self-compassion, in addition to helping you bring balance to self, it reduces stress and compassion fatigue. And Dr. Dory and I talked for a few minutes yesterday, and I learned that the students really just talked about compassion fatigue. And so I have a couple slides on that, but I know that you touched on that last week in your class. And I really wanted to learn more about compassion fatigue and you know what that is about. And so, you know, a final takeaway from Rab's article here is that mindfulness and self-compassion. Remember, this article is really talking about self-compassion, mindfulness of self, you know, inner self-awareness, and how that then impacts others that you work with and work around, particularly with patients in the healthcare setting, is that it increases your effectiveness. And we know that, right? We're practitioners of mindfulness, so we know that the better we are aware and balanced with self, how that manifests in our work with others. So yeah, I looked at compassion fatigue, and Hamilton in Beyond Balance talked about this, and he really based his work on Figley's work. And it's about the cost of carrying this compassion fatigue. And I really got to learn that, you know, people, particularly who, one of the articles I read are service providers who work with the homeless population, really deal with compassion fatigue and, you know, burnout and secondary trauma. And if not noticed, right, and handled pretty immediately, they become kind of numb, right, numb emotionally to themselves, which then makes them, you know, emotionally unavailable to people in their lives or to populations that they work with. And we see that every day in the workplace. I mean, people are writing about it, right? People show up at every day at work. They go through the motions. They drink an extreme amount of coffee. And it's just like going through the motions every day. But they get home, they're tired, they're stressed, they're anxious, you know, they're not sleeping well. And so they just are totally unavailable, you know, to give to themselves and certainly not to their family or other important people in their life. So when we talk about what are the costs actually, you know, of stress and burnout, I love this quote. I was like, oh my gosh, the cellular level up to our major biological systems. I mean, our nervous system, cardiovascular, digestive, to our cells, metabolism, and our sleep. The effect of chronic stress is devastating. And we know that. We see that in the workplace. We see that just how people are interacting day to day. And so some suggestions for how to, you know, relax, recharge, renew. And this is all coming from the space of, you know, mindfulness, self-compassion, self-awareness about what you're feeling and how to kind of combat some of them. And so some ideas that I took from there, you know, is to take your mental health days, use your days so that you're able to relax, renew. You know, we don't always want to take the sick days when we're actually dying and sick, but just take those days to, you know, journal, rest, sleep in, you know, walk in nature, do self-care days is what my sister calls them. And I think they're very important. You know, reach out, talking to trusted friends, solicited positive ideas from others or from colleagues. Now, I love this one from the article. It said, make and store calorie-light comfort food. And who doesn't love comfort food? Oh my gosh, that was great. I am a soup lover, so I thought about that. And even in the winter, particularly as I'm in Kansas and it's cold weather, it's snow, and a lot of people deal with seasonal affective disorder, right? Cabin fever, for those of us who don't know the medical term, is to have those comfort foods that just help with your physical being, your inner being, but are not like these empty calories that do nothing but, you know, make it worse. You know, the overuse and eating of sugar and all of these kind of processed foods. And of course, you know, the main one is meditation, which is one of the perfect ways. And Dr. Dorian and Dr. Laura were wonderful at the beginning of our webinar, you know, reminding us and inviting us to take a few breaths. And I love that. I wish every university, every class did that, because it just helps center you and brings you back to, okay, the present moment and what we're doing here and how that's going to impact our day or, you know, what's coming next. And so into further research, into that, what the research says about mindfulness and meditation is that when practicing meditation, your heart rate and breathing slow down, right? Your blood pressure normalizes. You use oxygen more effectively, and you sweat less. And I thought this was important when you look at the physical contributions. Your adrenal glands produce less cortisol. Your mind ages at a slower rate, and your immune function improves. And more importantly, I think your mind clears and your creativity increases. So yeah, again, just ways to relax, recharge, and renew. And again, we're talking about compassion, right? And mindfulness. So again, I'm raising my hand, and maybe there's some other invisible hands there raised. Curb the urge to overwork. Oh my gosh, we're all working. And so practicing self-compassion really invites us to, know that we have to work, right? Know we have to do it. But work and overwork are definitely two different things. And then stop beating up yourself. My son laughs at me. We call it the monkey chatter in our mind. Don't allow that monkey chatter to just continue to beat you up and wear you down. Another way to relax, recharge, and renew is to show empathy. Build those friendships at work. I know it's a lot of people say, oh, I don't have friends at work. I don't want friends at work. I just want to work at work and go home. I don't want to go out with them after work. I don't want to be involved with them beyond the workplace. But, the research shows there's a lot out there. Is when you're able to build healthy relationships at work, that it also helps to mitigate stress and burnout. And again, valuing people for who they are, showing up where they are, meeting them where they are, and then being able to coach and develop yourself and to coach others are all just ways that we can mitigate stress. And so our last article on developing compassionate leadership in healthcare, some of the main takeaways there. The article really centered on compassionate leadership, and that it, along with servant leadership, is arguably more appropriate in the healthcare setting. And that compassion also reflects competence, timeliness, and space in the workplace to reflect and to recharge. I thought that was really great. And then compassionate leaders who see leaders and followers, as I said earlier, as mutually dependent and dynamically intertwined. And I thought that was really great. So in summary, and I think, we're just at 1 hour and 3 minutes, which is great. This was a quote I love from the Greenleaf Center for Servant Leadership. And, what we know as servant leaders each day as we continue to open our heart space to mindfulness, to compassion. As servant leaders, we understand that must happen with us first, so that it manifests outward into our worlds, into our tribes, into our influences. We understand as servant leaders that our journey, it can be treacherous. The mountains we face are intimidating, and the gear we need is cumbersome. But we know it is a path of humility and of compassion, both in our home and in the world. And what we know is the journey is for us all. I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you all. I know that Dr. Dorian is going to allow us some time to answer questions and to delve further in our conversation. And if you want to connect with me, I am always so grateful and excited to continue the conversation and to delve deeper into these concepts, right, about mindfulness and servant leadership and how the 10 core competencies impact the workplace. For the students here on Week in My Eye, I gave you a couple of antecedents to servant leadership to help you answer that question on your syllabus. You're welcome. And yes, as Dorian said, I've written a couple of books, and they're here now. For my friends listening today, Dr. Dorian, I wanted to offer a 20% discount on the Servant Leadership and Followership book. It is our one that's academic in nature, and I look forward to the Reflections on Servant Leadership, Bloom Where You're Planted, coming in April, which is a book that I blogged for 3 years. And so I turned those blogs into sort of essays and reflections, 53 short, easy read chapters that talk about a competency or an idea within servant leadership, where you can just open the book and turn to any one of them. It's not a book you need to, read from beginning to end. Just maybe a competency or a thought for a day, turn to it, read it, reflect on it, and enjoy servant leadership. So Dr. Dorianne, my blessings. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Davis. I'm really happy and thrilled with your presentation, which really aligns very well with the material that we've been covering in our course. I'd like to open it to questions and first invite any of our class members who are on the call, if you want to unmute yourselves and ask questions, please.
I had a quick question for Dr. Davis.
Yes.
I was really interested in what you talked about, your experience in Newark, New Jersey.
Mm-hmm.
I thought it was very interesting that that I found it kind of ironic that was sort of a less desirable place to go, and that you were in fact teaching about being a servant leader, and I wondered about the just, you said meeting the people where they are, and it just really very succinctly described that experience. And I wondered if you felt like there was a correlation between a servant leader doing work where it's needed most,
Mm-hmm.
and that in turn having a most enriching experience for the leader, so that the correlation between the need and then the satisfaction of doing your best servant leadership work is related.
Yes, yes, yes. And again, I say yes. The correlation servant leadership is a two-way thing. And that's why I like to use the term for myself, for my 14-year-old son, as we're all emerging servant leaders, right? Because in the first part of your statement where here we are, named and titled as subject matter experts on servant leadership. However, some of us were less excited, about going to an area to teach servant leadership where the need was the greatest. But I have always, Gretchen, been drawn directly, almost just unconsciously, to those places and to those areas. And just even my own background experience, my own upbringing, where I come from, and where I've been able to get to. So I can relate to some of the ideas of what Miss Mary was talking about. I can relate to, seeing the clinic in such a, really distraught area in town. I mean, I arrived there in the Uber, as trash everywhere, the gates everywhere. Very intimidating, really, Gretchen, for some people who may not be used to that. And it may be like, okay, where am I, looking around, feeling kind of nervous. I'm drawn straight to those places. And I think when people see your heart, and they see that first, right? They feel it, they see it before you ever open your mouth. They're drawn to that. And I always engage everyone, Gretchen. And I teach my son this. Just as much as you speak to the teacher or the principal in school, the dean or, the CEO, speak to the janitor, speak to the lady who cleans the classroom, speak to the people who dump the trash. Because you never know who people are, who is, rooting for you, who has your best interest, and where they're at with it. People are intelligent in every walk of life. And you will, mistake yourself if you have perspectives on, who should be spoken to and who shouldn't, who should be ignored and who should not be ignored. And so I mentioned Miss Mary because she sticks out in my mind, and, she was always waiting for me at the door, and I'm like, hey, Miss Mary, how are you doing? and meeting them where you are. I didn't want to go into Miss Mary as an academician, we all are, and say, oh, well, I'm teaching the Leading with Values program where we're teaching frameworks and tools. I'm like, no, Miss Mary, we teaching each other how to get along, how to love each other, how to be better with each other in conversation. Just meeting where she could understand that. And then just look for me to come. How beautiful is that, right? When people are waiting for you, looking for you to come. So you're right, Gretchen. Yes, I believe there's a correlation between teaching, facilitating, showing up, and meeting people where they are, teaching what you know, and the correlation between the greatest need and then what comes from it. What impact did you make? I talk to my son all the time about your influence, right? And when you show up somewhere, well, I believe they're not from an ego-centered perspective, and I teach them too. You have influence. My son's popular at school. Be very careful about that influence. I remind myself that whenever you go places and you're writing books and you have all this good stuff going, that people are watching and they're influenced. And so your influence matters. And how you use that positively, lovingly, and from a heart space, from a others-centered approach, and not like this kind of ego-centered approach, you're always going to have great success. And Gretchen, I really would say great love. And Miss Mary exemplified that. I hope that answered your question.
It did. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Are there other questions from any of the classmates? If not, we'll just open it.
I actually had a question for Dr. Davis.
Okay.
My name is Lauren. Hi, I'm in the class. Dr. Davis, you said that there was a connection between the servant leader and Myers-Briggs.
Mm-hmm.
And in the research that we did in creating compassion and burnout and all of that, there was a connection between personality types, the big 5 personality types or the 5 frameworks. Do you think that there would, because there is that relation between Myers-Briggs, that there would be a correlation or a relation with the big 5 personalities? Do you think that the neuroticism or the neurotic personality type may struggle more with adopting those traits? What is sort of your opinion or theory on that?
That's a really interesting question. And I think, and I'm remembering reading some of that, and I think it's likely that the anxiousness and neuroticism does correlate to being, less able to handle it. Now, can you, and through mindfulness and, kind of the balance of work life and understanding, because I think neuroticism and a lot of that stems from, my personal opinion, Lauren, this kind of ego sense of self, right? And I think when you can move from that and learn how to cope, how to manage with that, and how that is destructive, I think you can move from that place to still be able to work from an other-centered approach. But is it, the one that has more resistance? I think they're likely to have a greater resistance than others, Lauren, who may not have that. And that book is also online. So if you want a chance, you can also check that out to even go into more depth about the 5 personality types, what gifts or natural talents are in each of those categories, and then how you can use those to show up as a servant leader. So I thought that was really fascinating. And it's in every area. So every area, every person can be a servant leader. For instance, as I was saying, I'm analytical. So if I use those skills or those skill sets as a servant leader, I'm really honoring myself, in the work I do. And someone else who's in any one of the other 5 sets, and whatever natural gifts fall naturally for them, in that area. I think it might take more work for some, as it will, for others. And it just depends on, again, personally for me, what's your level of mindfulness? What's your level of knowledge of yourself and where you are inwardly, and how that's going to manifest outwardly. Because Lauren, I think, some people are asleep. They're asleep to their internal self, their sleep to emotional intelligence, self-awareness, and how that can impact their world, their inner world and their outer world.
I agree.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Anybody,
Thank you.
just open up in general to other questions. We only have a few minutes left for our call.
I have a question. Dr. Davis, my name is Kristen, and I wondered if you see differences in the work with healthcare settings versus other kinds of organizations.
That's a great question. My latest experience with healthcare is slightly different, Kristen, in that in organizations, as opposed to healthcare, they're not working with human beings like, dialysis patients or, other patients on a daily basis. So the focus is more on working with your team, working with your employee, working with your co-colleagues, which, I think some things are the same, yes, but there are things that are different. For example, in the healthcare setting, dealing with patients who have diagnoses that are terminal, or dealing with people who are sick, I think it's different when you're dealing with people, for instance, like my mom. She was a lovely, outgoing, pretty ornery, in a good way, woman who enjoyed her life and was in the Baptist church and loved going to church and going to lunch with her girlfriends after church and shopping and all of that. And then as sickness took on, right, diabetes, high blood pressure, they removed her leg due to diabetes. This beautiful spirit that people once knew just began to degenerate, lower and lower and lower into sickness. And so when healthcare providers meet these people, and I used to say this to the people at the nursing home and to the people at the clinic, and I want to give a shout out to Miss Diane, who was our clinical manager here in Kansas and just became family to us and loved Mom dearly, is that they don't see the person, Kristen, who was the person who was the lovely, outgoing, spirited, a great person who was funny or crazy or, wonderful, just whatever. Now they're dealing with sometimes the shell of the person. And so it requires, I think, a greater level of compassion, right? A greater level of mindfulness in finding out and understanding the person, maybe from their family or friends, which, like for instance, and I keep saying my mom, we're on the year anniversary of her transitioning, Kristen. So a lot of my experience and thought about her and about my work in leadership are just kind of in my spirit right now. But I would put pictures up on her wall, made beautiful, huge pictures of her life in the roaring 1920s and 30s when Mom was this beautiful woman, with all this stuff, so that her caregivers and her nurses and the doctors could see, okay, this is the woman that you are working with now. Now, I know what you see now, and I know what you're treating. Now you're treating her illnesses, you're treating all that, but this is Jean, right? This is my mom, who was this fascinating woman. And it happens for every single patient. Miss Mary in Newark, New Jersey, your mom, whoever, everybody's mom, parents who are there is to invite healthcare professionals. And, we talk about doctors and bedside patient manners. And also my just recent work with nephrologists and doctors who come into the clinical setting once a month, right, who only know the name of the patient. And I'm not saying all of them, Kristen, okay, I'm not making a blanket statement about all doctors or all nephrologists, but it is a call to action. It is a definite call to action. In the 11 months I worked with 4,000 clinical managers, that we invite doctors who see the dialysis patients less and less. We encourage them in terms of bedside manners, in terms of engaging the patient on a deeper level, Kristen, than about the 2 minutes that they see, and they have to see all the patients in there. I get it. But I have experienced, a lack of compassion. And I just invite doctors and healthcare professionals to take a deeper dive into the person, not the diagnosis in front of you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kristen.
Yeah.
Great. I think we have time for one last question, if there's one more question.
I actually do have a question from the this is Luann Fortune.
Mm-hmm.
And from a practice standpoint, you are working in the world with organizations. And when you go into an organization, if they buy the principles and they want to learn how to be servant leaders, how do you teach them how to do that? What kind of coaching, consulting do you offer to reorient a style that might not be there right now?
That's a beautiful question, Dr. Luann. And I think it's a several step process. And I think it's, first of all, always engaging any organization who says, wow, servant leadership is a philosophy, idea, a concept that we would like this organization to move towards. And many of my conversations have started around the organizational culture, right? So going in and having kind of these great conversations and understanding, first of all, what's the organizational culture? And is it open to servant leadership? And we're not saying, oh no, they're so far away, there's no way we're going to be able to go in here and help, get these practices underway. So it's part, I say, academic, heady stuff, having them understand evidence-based, practices. And then it's moving from that kind of understanding to, and we have this question all the time, like that the theory's great, Crystal. Oh, wow, the articles are great. The research is great. Now, how am I every day going to go and show up at work, in the workplace, and use, servant leadership and be present? And we offer also that after, like, for instance, this Leading with Values program, we offered extensive, like group and one-on-one coaching to continue to reinforce, right, the frameworks and the tools that we taught while there. But, we'd be asked that question time and time again. And Dr. Luann, I guess the greatest answer, and I talked with, and it just seemed like coincidence, I'll say that again, is that after I got into it, I would always be partnered or have the opportunity, let's say that politically correct, the opportunity to work with the most resistant person to the leadership program. And it just comes down to this space and question of these are the things that are required. I'm sorry, did you hear that? Okay, we're back. These are the tools and frameworks, and no one can really force you, Dr. Luann, to take hold of them. It becomes really this self-responsibility and this inner work. And we realize, and we talked about it quite extensively, is some people don't want to do the inner work. I mean, some people simply, and it's hard work. It's hard work. So let's just put that on out there. We're going to say that. So we're not touting like, oh, you're going to learn these couple of frameworks and you're going to come back to work next week and you're going to have empowering language. You're going to have an asset focused mindset. And you're going to have an outcome focus rather than a problem focus. No, it doesn't work like that. It takes time. It takes dedicated effort. It takes realization, showing up and knowing. For instance, one of the easy way-ins, really for lack of a better word, is the framework when we talked about asset empowering versus disempowering language. And so, like, we had a set of empowering words and disempowering words. And we use examples like Kristen's still here. I can see her face, so I'll use her as an example. Kristen, you did such a great job working with the team and Jeff, our new employee. But next time, I really want you to engage Jeff more and pull him out of his shell. Okay, when I said the word but, that's disempowering. So it's like the first part of what I said to Kristen was great until I said but. And after everything after it negated all of the positive I said to Kristen. And so we invited them in examples like that to say, Kristen, wow, you did a great job on facilitating that meeting and engaging Jeff, our new client. And I would love to kind of marinate with you and talk about ideas or how we might include Jeff next time and pull him into the fold. Is that something that you think we can do together? All of a sudden, Kristen's like, yay, Crystal, let's have coffee. Let's talk about it. So I just think, that was kind of an easy way to get in to say, let's start being mindful of our language. I can't, I shouldn't, I won't, this won't work. We don't have enough time. There are not enough resources to. How can that work? Or if that were possible, how might that look? And that I believe it was a way for people to just say, oh, and they come back and say, Crystal, I said but 20 times, but by session 2, oh, I said but only 2 times, so it was, I believe language was a great gateway into saying that is good work, and here is the deeper work that we're inviting one another to do around our mindset, our consciousness, and how we treat people, and specifically patients.
Thank you so much, Dr. Crystal Davis. I'm so happy that you could join us today. It was a really rich presentation. Luann has put a message in here that if anyone who is not in the class would like to have materials from this webinar, you can mail her at lfortune@saybrook.edu. And so we're going to conclude the recording here. And again, thank you so much, Dr. Davis, for joining us. And thank you,
Dr.
everyone.
Davis, and sorry, Dorian. Dr. Moss had to leave early, but he also asked me to convey to you that his appreciation, he said he found it completely inspirational and very thought-provoking.
Thank you so much. And I appreciate the opportunity to be with you all today. And I'd love to continue the conversation.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Everybody.
Bye-bye.